Journeys past and present, Kyiv to Constantinople. Hooray! Summer holidays had begun. Yaroslav had finished second grade, and his parents gave him a wonderful present, a sea trip to Istanbul, a city in Turkey. Yaroslav lived with his mom and dad in Kyiv. First, they took a night train to Odessa. The journey took one whole night. Yaroslav loved riding the train at night. The little room rocked gently from side to side, and the wheels went clickety-clack in the dark. From Odessa, they took a bus to Chornomorsk, where there was a big port, and there, waiting by the water, was the ferry that would take them all the way to Istanbul. A ferry is a big ship. It can carry people, bags, and even cars. This ferry left in the evening when the sky was already dark and the lights from the shore sparkled on the sea. After their tickets and documents were checked, Yaroslav and his parents walked up a wide gangway and climbed aboard. Their cabin was small and cozy. There were bunk beds, little curtains, and handrails everywhere, so people could hold on if the sea became wavy. When they had unpacked, Yaroslav climbed into the top bunk. "How long will we sail?" he asked. "One day," Dad said. "We'll arrive tomorrow evening." "One whole day?" Yaroslav cried. "That is so long." Yaroslav's dad was a historian. He knew all kinds of stories about long, long ago. Dad laughed softly and said, "Did you know that our ancestors once traveled this same way, not in one day, but in 40 days? Yaroslav's eyes grew wide. He climbed down from the top bunk and sat beside Dad. "Why did it take so long?" he asked. "All right," Dad said. "Listen carefully. This story happened about 1,100 years ago. In the lands where Ukraine is today, there was once a great state called Kievan Rus. Its capital was Kyiv, just like today. Even then, Kyiv was rich, busy, and famous. It had a prince's palace, beautiful churches, and lively markets. One of those markets was in the place we now call Podil. Merchants in those days were called kupets. There were many, many merchants in Kyiv. Some lived there, and others came from faraway lands. People came to Kyiv to buy, sell, trade, talk, and learn news from the wide world. Now let us imagine one merchant who lived in Podil. His name was Oleg, just like the famous Prince of Kyiv. Oleg bought 50 barrels of honey and 50 barrels of wax from village people, and he decided to sell them not just nearby, but far away, in Byzantium itself. Byzantium was one of the most powerful and amazing countries of that time. Its capital was Constantinople, one of the biggest, richest cities in the world. In Kievan Rus, people often called it Tsargrad. Today, the city of Istanbul stands where old Constantinople once stood. In Tsargrad, there were many churches, and churches needed wax candles, so wax was very useful there. People also loved honey. Byzantine children probably asked their parents again and again, "Please, can I have some honey?" Oleg was sure he could sell his goods well. Oleg spent many months preparing for the journey. Back then there were no airplanes, no cars, no buses, no trains. People could travel by horses with carts or sleighs, or by water in boats and ships. To reach Tsargrad, Oleg had to sail down the Dnipro River and then across the sea. So, in March, he bought a boat called Alodia. It was a very large boat. It could carry 40 people and plenty of cargo. All winter, a craftsman had hollowed it out from a huge log. But it still needed more work before it could sail on the sea. So in April and May, other craftsmen prepared it. They added oars, a mast, sails, and a rudder. How did Oleg pay for all this? For the boat, he might give several barrels of honey. For the craftsmen, he might give marten furs so they could make warm hats. Why not pay with ordinary money? Because money was not the same everywhere back then. In some places, people used pieces of silver called ahryvnias. In other places, they used foreign coins, food, or animal skins. At last, in early June, the boat was ready. "I am leaving," Oleg decided. His wife baked flatbread and pies for the road. She packed food, useful things, and warm clothes into a sack. After all, Oleg would come home when the weather was cold. The day of the journey finally arrived. It was June and warm, so Oleg dressed simply. Leather boots, trousers, and a long white linen shirt tied with a belt. He also put on his special lucky trousers. They had brought him luck on earlier trips to Constantinople, so of course he had to wear them again. He kissed his wife, ruffled his little son's hair, stood in the doorway and thought, "How in the world will I get 100 barrels of honey and wax down to the boat?" Of course, Oleg was not traveling alone. He had hired strong young men to help him. Some would carry things, some would row, some would guard the boat. But that morning, not everyone had arrived. One man was still getting ready, another had overslept, a third had been sent by his wife to buy milk. Oleg scratched the back of his head. Then he had an idea. He went to see an Arab merchant he knew well. This merchant had been coming to Kyiv for many years. His name was Ahmad. Oleg asked Ahmad if he could borrow several camels. Camels in ancient Kyiv? Yes. Ahmad had come with a camel caravan from a faraway land called the Baghdad Caliphate. Today, many different countries are found in those lands, including Iran and Iraq. Ahmad brought silk cloth and bright glass beads to sell. He also bought honey from Oleg and carried it back to sell in his own country. So Ahmad and Oleg were friendly with each other. And the camels already knew how to carry barrels of honey. Ahmad agreed to help. The barrels were tied with ropes and loaded onto the camels. Then the caravan set off toward the Dnipro. Oleg's little son sat very proudly on one camel and shouted, "Ho, ho!" Down the road where Borichiv Uzviz is today, the camels went toward the port where Oleg's boat was waiting. All the barrels were loaded onto the boat. Oleg's mother had to pull the little boy away from the camel because he did not want to climb down. He began to cry. "Hush now," Oleg said. "I'll bring you a fine little gift from Tsargrad." The boy stopped crying at once. "A gift from Tsargrad?" That sounded interesting. Oleg smiled and jumped into the boat. All his helpers had finally gathered and taken their places. "Forward," Oleg called, "to Tsargrad." The rowers dipped their oars into the water. The boat moved away from the shore. Oleg waved happily to his wife and son and thought, Hooray! I am on the road again! First, Oleg's boat sailed to the town of Vitichiv. Today, this place is the village of Vitachiv in the Kyiv region. There was a port there where boats gathered before long journeys. Traveling alone was dangerous in those days. Robbers and nomadic pechenegs might attack travelers and take their goods. So merchants traveled together in big groups. It was much safer that way. Oleg stayed in Vitichiv for 3 days, waiting for his merchant friends to arrive with their boats. What did he do while he waited? He did one of his favorite things. Like many old towns, Vitichiv was protected by high earth walls. On top of those walls stood a wooden fence called a palisade. Oleg liked to climb up onto the wall, sit beneath the wooden fence, and look down at the harbor. He watched the boats arriving one by one and tried to guess who had come and what they had brought. Oh, that must be Miloslav from Chernihiv. Those sacks are probably full of grain. And there is Mikula from Novgorod. What is hidden under that cloth? Iron again. I hope it hasn't rusted. And here comes Dobrinia from Vishorod. Looks like he has brought a whole boat of flax. In 3 days, 30 boats gathered. At last, the whole flotilla set off down the Dnipro toward the sea. Oleg loved this part of the journey most of all. The sun shone. A breeze filled the sails. The rowers pulled their oars together. Oleg stood proudly and called, "Come on, boys, lighter, livelier." There was so much beauty to see. The river glimmered. The banks passed slowly by. Birds flew above the water. Sometimes the boats raced each other to see who could go faster. That playful Mikula often passed Oleg's boat, but Oleg passed him more than once too. So they sailed for many days. Sometimes at night they came ashore to rest. Then the cities ended and the wide steppe began. In the steppe, the travelers often slept on the water. The rowers took turns resting so the boats could keep moving. That way, no bandits could creep up on them in the night. Everything went well until they reached the Dnipro rapids. Long ago, between the modern cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia, there were great rapids in the river. Huge rocks blocked the water. The river crashed and foamed around them. The water roared so loudly that it could frighten even a brave traveler. Almost 90 years ago, those rapids were covered by the waters of the Dnipro reservoir. But in Oleg's time, they were a very serious danger. A boat could break apart there, so the travelers had to pass each rapid in a special way. There were 7 rapids on the Dnipro, and each had its own name. The first was called Don't Sleep. That name already sounded like a warning. To pass it, the travelers put the passengers on shore. Then they carried the cargo on their shoulders. A few brave men took off their outer clothes, stepped into the water, and pushed the boat along near the bank, feeling the bottom with their feet. They passed the second and third rapids the same way, but the fourth rapid was too large and dangerous. For that one, they had to use a portage. A portage means dragging a boat over land where it cannot sail. The boats came to shore, and everyone climbed out. The men laid logs on the ground. Then they pulled the boat onto the logs and tied ropes to it. Strong young men grabbed the ropes and pulled with all their strength. Then the logs were moved forward, and they pulled again. In this way, the boat slowly rolled over the land. This was very hard work. The poor travelers pulled and pulled, their faces turned red, sweat ran down their cheeks, their eyes nearly popped from the effort. And this was also when Pechenegs often attacked. The Pechenegs were nomadic people who lived in the steppes of southern Ukraine. They raised horses, cows, and sheep, but they also sometimes attacked cities or travelers, took goods, and sold what they had taken. This time, smoke appeared on the horizon. Then a group of Pecheneg riders appeared, sitting high on their horses. They had bows, and their sabers flashed in the sun. Every boat carried weapons for protection, just in case. But Oleg looked carefully. There were about as many Pechenegs as travelers. A fight could last a long time, and many people could be hurt. So the merchants gathered quickly and decided to pay a ransom instead. Oleg took a barrel of honey and rolled it toward the riders. Miloslav dragged a sack of grain. Other merchants brought something too. When the Pechenegs saw the merchants coming with gifts, they stopped. Then Oleg and the Pecheneg leader had a careful talk. "Hello, travelers," said the Pecheneg. "Where are you going?" "Hello to you too," Oleg answered. "We are peaceful merchants. We are going to Tsargrad to sell what we have. We are not rich, but we are not greedy either. We are always ready to share. Please accept this sweet honey, this grain, and the gifts from my friends. Then let us continue on our way." The Pecheneg leader rode from merchant to merchant and looked at every gift. Then he turned to his men and spoke to them in his own language. At last, he said, "All right, leave these things here and go, but when you come back, do not forget to share again." Of course, Oleg said, nodding quickly. The merchants placed all the gifts in one pile and went back to their boats. The rowers had rested a little. Now they grabbed the ropes again and pulled with all their might. There were still 3 rapids ahead. It took several more days to pass them because both ways, pushing through water and dragging over land, were terribly tiring. After the rapids, the travelers reached an island then called St. Gregory's Island. Today, we know it as Khortytsia, near Zaporizhia. A huge oak tree grew there. Near that tree, the travelers held a feast to celebrate. They had passed the dangerous rapids. Of course, after such hard work, they needed at least 2 days to rest, walk on the grass, and lie in the warm sun. And after a feast, how could anyone leave right away? They had to sleep first. Then they sailed for a few more days to the island near the place where the Dnipro flows into the Black Sea. The Byzantines called it the island of St. Epherios. Today, it is called Berezan. There, the tired travelers rested for 3 days. Some swam in the sea, some lay in the sunshine. On the 3rd day, they prepared for the sea voyage. They raised larger sails, checked the boats for damage, and repaired what needed repairing. At last, the travelers went out to sea. We call this sea the Black Sea, but they did not sail straight across it. They stayed close to the shore because that was safer. If a storm came, they could stop and wait until the sea calmed down. Oleg was lucky. No wonder he had worn his lucky trousers. The weather stayed good. After about 15 days, sailing along the shore, the boats reached Constantinople. Oleg had left Kyiv in early June. He arrived near Constantinople in the middle of July. The journey had been so long that he was in no hurry to go home. More exactly, he stayed near Constantinople, not inside the city. Foreign merchants were not allowed to stay in the city for long. The rulers worried they might be spies, so the merchants lived by the sea near the pier. They had warehouses, trading places, and even their own church. Oleg found places for his helpers, laid out his goods, and began to trade. Business went well. Day by day, there were fewer barrels of honey and wax. After a long day of work, Oleg loved to swim in the warm sea. He traded for 2 months. By the middle of September, he had sold his last barrel of honey. That meant it was time to go home. But in Byzantium, there was an important rule. Merchants could not take money out of the country. They had to buy goods instead. So Oleg went into Constantinople to shop. Foreign merchants were watched carefully. They were allowed into the city only in small groups, no more than 50 people. On the chosen day, Oleg gathered his 40 helpers. A local official went with them. The official was supposed to keep them safe, but really, he was also there to make sure the visitors behaved themselves. Oleg walked through the city toward the market. Along the way, he saw beautiful churches, stone streets, and grand palaces. With the money he had earned, he bought expensive fabrics, silk, brocade, and velvet. His wife had asked for pretty cloth for a new dress. The prince and princess in Kyiv would also need fine clothes, and their servants would surely want the newest Byzantine fashion too. For his son, Oleg bought a big gingerbread cookie shaped like a camel. All the purchases were packed into sacks. Each helper lifted several sacks onto his shoulders, and the whole group walked back to the pier. Before leaving, everyone took one last swim in the warm Byzantine sea. Then they loaded the sacks into the boat and began the journey home. They left in September and came home about 2 months later. The way back took longer because they had to travel upstream on the Dnipro instead of down. That was when the warm clothes Oleg's wife had packed became very useful. This time, the pechenegs did not bother the travelers. Maybe they had baked such tasty honey cakes from the merchants' honey and grain that they were too full and sleepy for another raid. In November, Oleg finally walked into his home in Kyiv. His little son ran to him at once. "Daddy, Daddy, what did you bring me?" Oleg pulled out the camel-shaped honey cookie. The boy laughed with joy and began to nibble it. Then Oleg handed his wife a bundle wrapped in blue silk. Inside was cloth for her festive dress, and in honor of his return, she cooked such a delicious dinner that everyone sighed happily. "And that is the end of the story," Dad said. He patted his stomach. "Now I'm getting hungry too. Isn't it time for our dinner?" Yaroslav helped set the food on the cabin table. They ate well, talked softly, and then got ready for bed. Yaroslav climbed back into the top bunk. He closed the little curtain to make his own cozy corner. All night, the ferry rocked gently over the dark sea, and Yaroslav dreamed that he was sailing in a huge boat down the Dnipro River, carrying a whole boatload of gingerbread cookies. The waves rocked him up and down, until he slept deeply and sweetly.